Hello, internet friends. Wanted to use this opportunity to focus a bit on the back end here. And in this video specifically, we're going to be looking at Django and just getting something set up and the do's and don'ts and all that kind of stuff. I'm hoping to break this down into a few different videos that kind of go through the process of first setting up the project and then building some models, building some API endpoints, and then wrapping up with a couple of things. One being pulling in a front end. We'll probably use Flutter as the front end, but maybe if we have time, we'll also throw another front end option, a more web-based one, because really the front end of this is going to be agnostic. It shouldn't matter whether it's Flutter, whether it's React or whatever. And then to fully wrap it up, we're also going to show how to get this running on a server, possibly Heroku, possibly DigitalOcean. I haven't decided yet, but the process will be pretty similar regardless of what cloud backend you want to use. Anyways, let's just get started here. So I just have my terminal open here. And the first thing we're going to want to do is install Django. And right now I'm installing it outside of a virtual environment. And the reason is because I just want to basically use sort of a version of Django to really scaffold the initial project. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run python-m pip install Django, and specifically I want to install the latest stable version. Now you'll notice I have Python 3.1.0 here, and the only reason I have that is I have multiple versions of Python on my machine. I have to support some older ones on some projects and some more newer ones. Django 5 requires at least Python 3.10. Chances are, though, you can probably just install Python using the latest, and you'll be fine. So you don't have to worry about this little thing. It's just because I have multiple versions. So I'm going to run this first. And now what I'm going to do is use something that gets installed when you install it at your root is you get something called Django admin. So I'm going to run Django admin, start project, and then a name for my project. I'm going to call this DJ_API, like Django API. You can call it whatever you want. Okay, and then we're going to cd into that folder. And you'll see there's just a folder, and then there's a manage.py, and we are going to go ahead and open this in VS Code. Okay. So from here, what I want to actually do now, because I don't want to be installing all these different packages on my main machine, you'll run into major problems if you have multiple projects with different dependencies, different versions. So we are going to create a virtual environment now. So just to repeat, when I first installed Django, I wasn't in the virtual environment because I really just wanted to have Django on my root system to be able to set up and initialize this project. But we are now going to install a virtual environment. So we're going to do Python and then -m venv, that's the name of the module we want to run, the virtual environment module. And then we're going to name a path for it, which we're also going to call venv. So let's run that. Now, again, I'd have this Python 3.10. You can just do Python. You should be fine. We'll just ignore these. Okay, so we've installed that, and you'll see there's now a venv folder right here. But what we want to do is actually activate our virtual environment. So we're going to run source venv, and then inside of it, bin, and inside of that, activate. So that's just a little application that essentially activates that virtual environment. So now moving forward, anything we install or run in Python will be run within this sort of safe space where we won't have conflicts between different dependencies. Okay. So we've activated it now. Now what I want to also do, and we just need to open up a Python file for this, some manage.py will work. We want to make sure VS Code is also understanding the virtual environment. This may happen by default for you, but what I want to do is actually click this little guy down here in VS Code and choose the one that says .venv bin Python. So we're actually going to point it right to that. And that way it actually will understand, okay, this kind of stuff. So I'm still getting an error here, and that's because we haven't actually installed Django into it. But once we do, this error will go away. So let's do that next. So we're simply going to run pip install Django. And actually a capital D is what we need here. It might work with a lowercase, but for some reason, the pip package is an uppercase D, which is kind of rare in pip packages. Okay, so now it's installed Django right inside this virtual environment. You'll see this error went away because it actually understands this. I can actually, click through this and see the code within our site packages inside our virtual environment. So we have Django installed. We are great. So before we get ahead of ourselves and start adding a lot of packages, we want to be smart. We want to be careful because we want to have a good way that, if something really goes wrong, we can wipe everything virtual environment wise and start again. Also, when we deploy this to the server, we have to tell the server like what packages to install every time it deploys. So we're going to make a new file. We're going to call it requirements.txt. And in here, we're actually going to look at what version of Django got installed. So you'll see at the very bottom of this, we have Django, and it was 5.0.3. And we're going to put this in here, but wherever this dash is, we're going to replace that with 2 equal signs. So this is essentially a way to say, hey, we want to use Django, 5.0.3. Now, if for some reason you missed that, you installed something, you've lost your history here, you can always run something called pip freeze. And right here, this will list out all the packages installed. Another thing you could do is you can actually take this output and just replace it in your requirements.txt. However, I would advise not to do that because 3 of these 4 packages were actually just installed because Django required these, for instance. And it's better just to, let's only care about the ones we decide to install, and it can then solve for the versions. For instance, if we, SQL parse might have had an update, we don't want to specifically say we want to use, 0.4.4. We want to use whatever Django is saying we should use. So I like to just include the files in here that I've actually installed manually. And you'll see that as we go through this process. Okay, let's install a few other things here while we're at it. So I'm going to install DJ database URL. And this will allow us to very easily have manage and work with our database, especially in different environments. And you'll see that in a bit. We're also going to install a few other things. But again, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we kind of want to be doing this pattern, right? When we're installing things, take DJ database URL, replace this, and so on and so forth. We also just installed Redis or Redis. I'm actually not sure the pronunciation. I originally always called it Redis, and then I heard people saying Redis, so I tried to change that. But then since I've heard people say Redis, it's probably Redis. There's only one E. I don't know. So I'll just try and call it Redis from now on. Okay, so we have Redis, and that's going to be used for like our caching, as well as a few other things. We're also going to install white noise. So white noise is going to be required, especially when we get up to a server here, and we'll put that one in too. And that's for static files. We're also going to install Celery. And this is for async tasks. Now, keep in mind, you want to keep doing this pattern that I'm doing, but I don't want to, waste people's time doing this tedious thing. So I'm going to update them all after while I have it paused, just to save some time here. Next, we're going to install Django-environ. And this allows us to work with environment variables really easily. We're going to install Unicorn. And that will be required when we want to host this on a server. The local Django development server will serve it for us when we're working locally, but remote, we need Unicorn in order for everything to work. We want to install SciCobb2, which is basically a database, something to work with Postgres, because we're using Postgres in this. Although you could follow along with this with some very subtle changes and use MySQL if you wanted, or even SQLite if you don't want to worry about that. But I do think Postgres is the best database. Lastly, for now, we're going to install Django REST framework. And this will be used to basically do our API calls and stuff like that. Okay, as promised, while I was paused, I just got all these in here so you don't have to deal with my boringness. I like to keep these alphabetical as best as possible. It doesn't matter in terms of, Python doesn't care, but it's just nice for, keeping things sort of organized. So I think I got that alphabetical now. Okay, so we're gonna do that. The next thing I really like to do on a new Django project, if I'm not starting with like a boilerplate, is I don't like that my project name is kind of the same as this folder that we're in. It just feels messy to me. It's like I got a CD into here, then CD into here. So I always like to rename this literally the word project, because this is where all of our like sort of core project files are gonna go. Now, in doing that, we can't just simply change a folder name because a lot of these files are already set up to point to that folder. So we're going to make some changes here. And you can do this with a find replace, but we're going to look for anything where it says DJ API, .settings, and we're going to change that to project.settings. And if I actually search for DJ API, there's going to be a few more that come up because sometimes they come in comments and stuff like that, but you could safely do a find replace. But I'll show you all the spots we need to do it in. So we had to do it in manage.py. We also have to do it in our asgi.py. So we'll just change this to project, and I'll put that on my clipboard to make this a little bit faster. We're going to open up our urls.py, and we're going to search for, is it in here? Maybe it doesn't go in this one. Never mind. Okay, we're going to open our settings.py, and we're going to look for another reference here. There it is, root URL config. We want to make that project.urls. And I believe lastly, although if we missed one, we'll get an error and we'll be able to find it pretty easily. We want to change it in our WSGI. So we'll have these files open. I'll explain what they are. So manage.py is really something for running, your development tasks and starting the server and stuff like that. You never really write any code in this file. This basically is just going to be like this for the future of your project. WSGI, similar. We're not going to ever make changes in here other than that one little change that we did. And this is for sort of booting up the WSGI application, which is basically like our web server essentially that handles traffic for like normal synchronous requests. And ASGI is very similar to that, but it's meant for async, which is a pretty quite newer thing in Django is asyncs now built in. URLs I have open, but we didn't actually do anything there, so we won't talk about it. And settings, this is where all of our settings for our project goes. And we're going to be making some changes in here very shortly. Okay. So we've renamed all that stuff. Everything's good. We've installed a bunch of packages. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new file called docker compose.yaml. And I'm going to paste something in. Now this, if you look in the description, there's a link to this repository, so you'll be able to pull this yourself and tweak it however you see fit. But what this is meant for spinning up a local version of our environment for our database, which is what this entry is for Redis, for our caching basically, and for our broker, which will help us do async tasks quite a bit further into this series. And this allows us, to basically run something outside of our normal Mac OS or Windows or Linux environment that has our database on it and all that kind of stuff. So in order to get this working, you do need to install Docker. If you really are against installing Docker, you can follow the Django tutorial just to kind of get past this part and run everything like right on your host OS. But I definitely recommend getting Docker installed and using. So you need to get it, download it. Everything's good, and just make sure it's running. So I have it running right now. So I am good, and we'll be able to get to the next step. So this is essentially just configuring stuff like what DB we're going to be using, what user, what the password is. You notice I just have them all the same. You can make them whatever you want, but you'll just have to update things in the configuration. Same with Redis, just configuring what port will be used, and same with our broker. So just some configuration files. And, if you are coming here from Flutterland, you're familiar with YAML type configuration. So it shouldn't be too out of the ordinary. Okay, the next thing we need to do is actually get our Docker running. So we created our Docker Compose right in the root. And then in the root, we also run Docker Compose up. And then I like to run it with -d because that will actually detach it from the terminal, which is helpful because then we can reuse this terminal for other tasks. Okay, so now that was really fast. And if I actually go to Docker, which I will just open up, we should see DJ API running, and within it, we'll see our 3 different services. Okay, great. Okay, next step. We are going to configure our environment now. So I'm going to add a new file called .env. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to make a new file called gitignore because we don't want to commit this file. This is going to be our settings for our local environment. And for 2 reasons, we don't want to really commit it code. You could leak sensitive data, although, your local data, hopefully your password isn't something you're using somewhere else anyways. And secondly, if you're working with other devs, you don't want to all have to use the same password and same ports. This allows you to configure it the way that you want. And what we're going to put in here is a few things. I'm just going to paste them in. So you want your database URL. And again, if you ended up changing anything in your Docker Compose, like the name of the database and the password and all that kind of stuff, you'd have to update it here too. But if you're just working with what is in the repo, this will work fine. So we're setting database URL to that. Debug to true. We definitely want that true locally. We'll get better errors back. Redis URL, similar to this. If you didn't change anything, just keep it as is. And then our secret key, you can make this anything you want. It can be anything. I just put some random characters, everything's good. And this is what Django uses for some of its like crypto and cryptography sort of things as sort of a, its secret key to do these things with so that people can't crack things easier. I don't know. I'm not much of a scientist in that security world, but definitely changes to something unique. Again, locally, it doesn't really matter. You could just put the word Django here if you wanted, and you shouldn't have any problems. So we'll save that. And then, in our git ignore, we are going to ignore this file. And that means that when we actually do set this and push this to GitHub, whether it's a private or public project, this file will not go there. Okay, next up on the docket, we are going to now work with those values. So we've created these, but we need to be able to access these from our settings. So let's go to our settings file. And the first thing we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to import our DJ database URL. And we'll just do that right under this path import. So we're going to import this here. And wherever we have our databases, so by default, it's going to be sort of, almost halfway, we're going to replace this. So instead of it saying, putting in this engine of using SQLite, which is what Django uses out of the bat, which makes sense. This is just a file-based system database. It will just work. You don't have to install, Docker and all this stuff, but it's not something you want to actually use in your real app. So we'll get rid of this, and we're just going to make it databases default, and then DJ database URL.config. And basically, this will look for this environment variable, which we will be setting, and just use it. So that's cool. We got that. So we'll have that there. Next, we're going to create a file inside our project just called environment.py. Now, this is safe to version control. This won't actually have anything in it related to like our secret keys or anything. This will just be a file that kind of like bootstraps our environment. So I will just put this in here. Again, this will be in the repo. You can just pull it there. But we're just getting some sort of things, getting our base dir based on where this file is located. And then we're actually, because we're importing Environ, we can get this thing called env here. And it will look through our base directory for a file called .env, and then it will read it. So that's going to just read all the things in here and essentially set them when everything boots up. And then what we can do in here, which is really great, is we can import that. So I'll do this right at the top. In the first import, we're going to from project.environment. So this is a Python module. So we can actually just say .project because that's our project to reference this. And then because we have an init.py in here, it's considered a module, and we can actually go .environment. So based on the file name with .py, and we can import anything that's declared in there. So I'm importing this right here. And what we can do now is, for instance, in our secret key, we can go env, with capitals, env dot, and then this will be a string that we want to get, and then secret key, which is what we called it here, secret key. So now it's being set from this environment variable instead of right in our project code base, which will just make things, safer for all the reasons mentioned before. So we'll do that. We also want to do something for debug mode. So we'll do env. In this case, it'll be a bool, and we can set a default. So if it is omitted, which, maybe in our production server, rather than putting false, we actually just omit it completely. We can have a fallback to default. So we'll do that there. And then we also need to do, for future work, we'll get Redis in here too. So I'm just gonna do this right at the bottom. You can, of course, put like cache or something like this here, and we'll get it by getting that string. So we're currently getting database URL, and that's actually happening sort of a little bit more magically, less manually. But we have, debug true, Redis URL, and secret key are all being accessed. And of course, as you move forward and make new settings, like maybe there's, a setting like what language code is being used, or like time zone or something like that, you can, follow the same pattern to configure it. Okay, so there's nothing now really like secret in here. We're not exposing our database credentials, anything like that. So we are, I think, pretty good to go. So next thing we can do is let's just try something. Let's go Python manage.py. Like I said before, this is kind of for doing local work with, and we can run something called run server. And let's just see if we have any errors. This is usually where you'll get some errors. And yes, we do have one. So I think I missed something in. Let's just search for this string. In our setting, I think there was another one in settings, but we need to do this one too. So we'll change that. And then I'll just clear this fully just so we can make sure everything's good. But it is running. Now, we do have this warning here. We have 18 unapplied migrations. And that's because Django comes with some built-in database migrations right when you clone it. Basically, instructions to set up your database tables and stuff that just the core Django needs. And of course, we'll be making our own models and stuff shortly, but we need to run this. So in order to run this, we can go Python manage.py migrate. And we'll see it went through all these things. So there's things like setting up their content types, stuff for auth, stuff for the admin, some more auth stuff, sessions, that kind of thing. And we're good there. Next, another command we can run is create super user. It's all one word for some reason. And we can give it a username. I'll just use admin. I'm just going to do admin at myname.com. And then we'll just give it a random short password. This password, assuming we're talking about our local environment, doesn't have to be secure because someone would need to be at your computer to access it. And chances are you're not going to have secure data in this database. This is our development database. This is meant for testing. Of course, if somehow you decide, I'm just going to open this up to the world and have secure data here, make your password secure. But also don't do what I said, because that sounds like a terrible idea. Okay, so now we've created our super user. And that'll make more sense what it is in a minute. But now we can do that run server command again, Python manage.py run server. And we will open this in our browser. And look, yes, we've installed successfully. Congratulations. We're seeing this because debug is true. So let's see if that's actually the case. Let's go to our env and let's set this to false. And let's run our server again. And we are getting this warning because allowed hosts is something that we have to set when debug mode is false. So let me fix that up real quick. Okay, so all we need to do is go to our settings file. And for purposes of now, we'll just do our local IP address, 127.0.0.1, and maybe also localhost in case we want to, access it that way. So we'll just put those guys in there. And we will run this. Again, this can be something you configure with your environment. And in fact, you probably should, but neither here nor there. So I do have debug false. I've restarted the server. And if we come back here, it's actually, we get just this more generic error message, not found. This is great because if you're not in debug mode, you don't really want to be exposing full on Django errors. If I actually tried to go to something crazy like this, I should just get another error just like that. But if we go back to debug true and restart our server. Now, keep in mind, when you make these changes, you always have to restart your server. It reads it really at the time of boot. Now, if we come back here, we get this error message, right? And this is great for us. This is great. Cool. We can really look at this and understand what it is. Oh, this didn't match. But some of these error messages can, like this one, maybe not as much, but it is exposing a little bit. It's telling me, there's a path called admin, right? So end users could be like, an admin path. I'm going to see what that is and try and hack. So even this, you don't really want to be exposing in the real world. And there's definitely other error messages that will, can expose some of your environment variables and all these kinds of things. So you never, ever, ever want debug true in production. You want to, keep that false. All right, so let's go to /admin. And here's where that super user thing came in. So if I can remember my password, I can log in. And of course, if you forgot your password, you can create another super user. Ultimately, you have the full source of truth in terms of control, because you can run the manage.py locally because you have the database credentials, because you have everything, and generate. But here I'm in the Django admin, which right now we can see there's some users. And okay, cool. We have, this guy, and there's some stuff here where I could change the password, update their name, add some different groups to it, all that kind of stuff. Django admin, super powerful. And we will be looking in this a lot in the next few videos as we're building our own, models. These are really just the ones that come with Django sort of built in. So there you have it. We have, our Django app up and running. The last thing I want to do to tidy up this video is something I really like to do, project setup, is once I have my virtual environment, is install something called black. So we'll do, pip install black, and I spelled install wrong. Okay. And we can install that. And depending on your, VS Code settings, you might have to go into some settings to enable black as your default formatter. But what's really great about black is if I put a bunch of space here as just an example and then save, it'll actually remove that extra space, as well as a million other things. It's basically the Python formatter. There's multiple, but black is, in my opinion, the best one. And it will make your code, just cleaner. It'll add, trailing commas and change things and just do nice things. And especially if we're working with other developers, you should definitely both be using the same, even if it's not black, make sure you're using the same settings, because you'll run into weird things when you commit where there was a change in this file, but the only change was a formatting change because developer 2 had a different formatter. And that gets really annoying when you're doing code review to be oh my gosh, 24 files changed and they didn't actually change anything to do them, and they just resaved them for some reason. So just a small, tip. And that's not just a Python tip. That's just a tip in general when you're working with other devs. Keep the same, linter formatting options, so that stuff doesn't happen. Okay, so there we go. We bootstrapped a quick project. And in the next one, we're going to actually make some models and just kind of learn a bit about that. So I look forward to seeing you there.